market manager rummages through black woman's purse, but when her police officer husband arrives, Dorothy Johnson trembled with anger as dozens of people stopped to watch the spectacle. Her personal belongings were scattered across the supermarket floor, displayed like evidence of a crime she had never committed. It all happened when the manager, Richard, snatched her black purse from her hands without explanation and dumped its entire contents onto the cold floor. The onlookers whispered, and some even filmed the scene with their phones, turning her humiliation into public entertainment. "You're stealing merchandise without paying," Richard said, his voice echoing down the main aisle. "I'm going to check every item in this purse." Dorothy, 62 years old, had dedicated 40 years of her life to education. She had taught in Chicago's public schools, educated hundreds of students, and had always been respected by everyone. Now retired for 2 years, she found herself at the center of a baseless accusation that made her heart race. "I didn't take anything," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You have no right to do this to me." Richard completely ignored her words and began examining each item on the floor. He found only her personal documents, blood pressure medication, old family photos, and a few mint candies. No store merchandise. Tears burned in her eyes, but Dorothy refused to cry in front of those people. She thought of her grandchildren, of how they would feel if they knew their grandma had endured such humiliation. She also thought of Robert, her husband, waiting in the car in the parking lot. "Where are the items you stole?" Richard insisted, as if the lack of evidence proved guilt. "I didn't take anything," Dorothy repeated, her voice slightly louder now. "You're accusing me for no reason." An older employee from the bakery section watched the scene from a distance with a worried expression. Mrs. Jenkins had known Dorothy for years. She was a long-time customer, always polite, but she didn't dare intervene, fearing retaliation. Richard finally finished examining Dorothy's belongings, but instead of apologizing for the false accusation, he maintained his arrogant stance. He was around 40, with brown hair and a permanently scowling expression that intimidated both employees and customers. "Pick up your things and get out of my store," he ordered, crossing his arms. "I don't want to see you here again." Dorothy slowly bent down to gather her belongings, feeling the ache in her back that age had brought. Every movement was a struggle against the humiliation consuming her. The crowd began to disperse, as if the show were over. As she tucked away her family photos, Dorothy thought of all the years she had spent working to build a fairer society through education. She had taught respect, dignity, and equality. Now at 62, she was learning firsthand that there was still so much work to be done. "Mom!" Jennifer's voice echoed down the aisle. Dorothy looked up to see her daughter rushing toward her. Jennifer, 35, was a lawyer and carried the same determination her mother had always shown. Someone had sent her a message about what was happening. "What's going on here?" Jennifer asked, glancing between her mother and Richard. "Your mother was caught trying to steal from the store," Richard replied coldly. "That's a lie," Jennifer snapped. "My mother is a retired teacher, a customer here for over 10 years. How dare you make such an accusation?" Richard shrugged as if Jennifer's outrage meant nothing. He was used to wielding his authority to intimidate people, especially when he knew he had the administration's backing. "There are cameras throughout the establishment," Jennifer continued. "Let's check those recordings right now." "The recordings are company property," Richard countered. "Only the regional management has access." Dorothy finally finished gathering her belongings and stood up with difficulty. She felt small, vulnerable, as if she had lost all the dignity she had built over decades. Jennifer hugged her, sensing the tension in her mother's body. "Let's go, Mom," Jennifer whispered. "But this isn't over." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. When they left the store, Robert was leaning against the car, talking on the phone. A former Detective Bureau investigator, retired for 5 years, he had built a solid and respected career. Now he worked as a security consultant for private companies, but kept the same sense of justice that had always driven him. "What happened?" he asked, noticing Dorothy's distressed expression. Jennifer quickly explained what had happened, watching her father's expression darken. Robert knew the signs of discrimination well and could recognize when someone abused their power. "I'm going back in there," he said, but Dorothy grabbed his arm. "No, Robert, I don't want any more trouble." "Mom, this can't just be ignored," Jennifer insisted. "You were humiliated in public for no reason." Dorothy got into the car silently, but her mind was racing. She thought of all the times she had taught about human dignity in her classes. She thought of the black students she had guided on handling discrimination. Now she was experiencing firsthand what had always been theory. On the drive home, Robert stayed quiet, but Jennifer could tell he was planning something. She knew that focused look of his well. Dorothy stared out the window, lost in thought. "You know what hurts the most?" Dorothy said suddenly. "It's not just what he did to me. Hurts knowing this probably wasn't the first time and it won't be the last. That's exactly why we can't let it slide," Jennifer replied. "How many other people have gone through the same thing and stayed silent?" At home, Robert locked himself in his office and started making calls. He used his security contacts to investigate the supermarket's history. He discovered several similar complaints had been filed against Richard, but all had been dismissed without proper investigation. Dorothy retreated to her room looking at old photos. One showed her on graduation day from education, radiant with happiness, another from her first day as a full-time teacher, and one from her retirement, surrounded by colleagues and students. How had it come to this? Jennifer made chamomile tea and went upstairs to talk to her mother. She found her sitting on the bed, flipping through a photo album. "Mom, you can't let this break you." "It's not just about me, sweetheart," Dorothy replied. "It's about all the people who go through this every day. How many young black men are followed by security in stores? How many women like me are treated like suspects? That's exactly why we need to act. You always taught me that change only happens when someone has the courage to stand up." Dorothy smiled for the first time since the incident. Jennifer was right. Her whole life had been dedicated to raising aware, resilient citizens. She couldn't just hide when it was her turn to fight. The next morning, Robert returned to the supermarket, not as an angry husband looking for a fight, but as the seasoned former investigator who knew how to gather information. He spoke to employees, observed the security cameras, and mapped out the entire store's layout. Richard recognized him immediately and tried to keep his distance, but Robert approached calmly. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday with my wife." "I have nothing to say," Richard replied, trying to sound authoritative. "Oh, you do. You accused a customer of theft without any evidence and humiliated her in public. That has a name: unlawful harassment." Richard swallowed hard. He knew Robert had been a detective, and that made him uneasy. He tried to use his authority as manager, but realized he was on dangerous ground. "I was just doing my job," he muttered. "Does your job include searching customers' bags without a warrant or probable cause? Does it involve dumping personal belongings on the floor? Because that's a crime, not a job." Robert spoke quietly, but his voice carried the weight of experience. He wasn't making threats, just stating facts. Richard tried to step away, but Robert continued. "I want to see the security footage. My wife was shopping normally when you confronted her. Let's see what really happened." "I already told you, only regional management has access to the recordings." "Then let's talk to regional management." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Jenkins, the bakery employee. She approached hesitantly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Sorry to interrupt," she said to Robert, "but I need to talk about what I saw yesterday." Richard tried to walk away, but Robert stopped him with a firm look. "What did you see?" Robert asked. "Your wife did nothing wrong. She was in the cereal aisle, far from where the manager claimed she took something. I saw everything because I was organizing the bread nearby." "Mrs. Jenkins, you shouldn't get involved in this," Richard cut in, clearly nervous. "And you shouldn't have done what you did to an innocent customer," she shot back, showing courage she didn't know she had. Robert thanked her for the information and asked for her contact. He knew witnesses were crucial in cases like this. Richard watched everything with growing frustration, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control. "This isn't the first time it's happened," Mrs. Jenkins whispered before stepping away. There's a messenger group where others who've been through the same thing talk. Robert mentally noted that detail. A pattern of behavior was exactly what he needed to build a solid case. Richard wasn't just a rude employee. He was someone who systematically abused his power. When he got home, Robert shared his findings with Dorothy and Jennifer. The information about the messenger group stood out the most. "I need to talk to these other people," Dorothy said, showing a determination she hadn't felt since the incident. "Mom, are you sure? It might be painful to hear similar stories." "I have to, Jennifer. If there's a pattern, other families are suffering. I can't just stand by." Mrs. Jenkins discreetly provided the group's contact. Dorothy discovered there were over 20 people who'd faced similar situations with Richard. Some were elderly women, others were mothers with young children, but they all had one thing in common. They'd been treated like suspects without justification. One of the most shocking messages came from Martha, a 70-year-old woman accused of hiding items in her cane. Another was from Melissa, a single mother who'd been searched in front of her young children. Each story felt like a knife to Dorothy's heart. "How has this been going on for so long without anyone doing anything?" Dorothy asked Robert. "Because people feel isolated, like their case was unique. And because Richard picks his victims carefully, people who can't defend themselves or don't know their rights." Jennifer began working on the legal aspects of the case. She discovered that the supermarket had no proper protocol for handling suspected shoplifters, and that Richard had acted completely outside legal boundaries. "We have a strong case for emotional damages," she explained. "But more importantly, we can force changes in the company's policies." Dorothy wasn't just interested in financial compensation. She wanted to ensure no one else would suffer the same humiliation. The retired teacher had been reborn with a renewed purpose. Over the following week, Dorothy received unexpected support. Catherine, the wife of one of the supermarket's main suppliers, had witnessed the scene and decided to speak out publicly. She had influence in local business circles and began questioning the store's management. "My husband has supplied products to this market for 15 years, Catherine told Dorothy during a meeting. "When he heard what happened to you, he was outraged. No one doing business with them should tolerate that kind of behavior." The support network grew when Megan, a local digital influencer with 50,000 followers, decided to champion the cause. She had recently lost her mother and identified with Dorothy's situation. "I'll use my platform to bring attention to this case," Megan promised. "People need to know this is happening." Megan's first video about the incident went viral quickly. She told Dorothy's story respectfully but powerfully, urging other victims to share their experiences. Within days, dozens of similar accounts appeared in the comments. Richard tried to downplay the situation when the supermarket's management questioned him about the growing backlash. He claimed he was just doing his job and that the accusations were exaggerated. "It's just people trying to make money off the company," he told the regional director, Edward Thompson. Edward wasn't easily fooled. He had built his career in retail and knew how to spot problems that could hurt business. The negative publicity was starting to affect sales. "How many similar cases have happened in the last few months?" Edward asked. "A few, but nothing major. People who tried to steal and are now making up stories. All of them are lying. Over 20 different accounts, including long-time respected customers." Richard realized he was losing credibility, but stuck to his version. He didn't know Robert was digging into his professional history at other stores. The former investigator found that Richard had worked at 3 different supermarkets in the past 10 years. In each one, there were reports of similar behavior, but he always managed to transfer before things became untenable. "He's protected by someone," Robert concluded. "No one keeps a job with that record unless they have connections." The answer came from an employee who chose to remain anonymous. Richard was married to Amanda, the only daughter of William Parker, the owner of the supermarket chain. Family protection explained how he kept his position despite constant complaints. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The discovery completely changed Dorothy and her family's strategy. They weren't just dealing with a problematic employee, but someone with family ties inside the company. That explained why previous complaints had never led to disciplinary action. "Now I understand why he feels so free to humiliate people," Dorothy remarked. "He knows nothing will happen to him." Jennifer decided to approach the situation from a broader legal perspective. If Richard was being protected by management, the entire company was responsible for the damages caused to customers. "Let's file a class action lawsuit," she announced. "It's not just about you, Mom. It's about everyone who's been harmed by this systemic behavior." Robert used his connections to investigate William Parker, the owner of the chain. He discovered that Parker was a respected businessman in the community, involved in several social initiatives. It seemed unlikely he knew the details of his son-in-law's behavior. "Maybe he doesn't know what's happening," Robert suggested. "Or maybe he's turning a blind eye because it's family." Dorothy Johnson decided to try a direct approach. She requested a meeting with William Parker to discuss the situation in person. She wanted to give the businessman the opportunity to resolve the issue internally before pursuing legal action. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Dorothy prepared carefully, gathering all the testimonies from other victims and the evidence collected by Robert. She didn't just want to tell her own story, she wanted to present a complete picture of the situation. On the scheduled day, Dorothy arrived at the company's office accompanied by Jennifer. The setting was elegant and professional, with photos of the Parker family on the walls. One of them showed William with Richard and Amanda on their wedding day. Unfortunately, Mr. Parker had an emergency and had to cancel the meeting. The secretary informed them. "We can reschedule for next week." Dorothy felt a pang of disappointment, but Jennifer sensed this might be a tactic to buy time. Experienced businessmen knew that delaying difficult meetings sometimes made problems disappear. "Mom, he's trying to wear us down. It's a common strategy when companies want to avoid accountability. Then we'll show him we don't give up easily." Dorothy used the extra time to connect with more victims through the messenger group. Each new story strengthened her determination to seek justice. She met Mary Ellen, a 75-year-old woman who had been searched in front of her young granddaughter. She also met Patricia, a visually impaired woman who was accused of hiding products in her medical equipment bag. The variety of victims showed that Richard didn't discriminate based solely on race or age. He simply targeted people he considered vulnerable or unable to defend themselves properly. Megan continued documenting the cases on her social media. Her respectful yet firm approach was sparking important discussions about discrimination and abuse of power. Local businesses began publicly stating the importance of treating all customers with dignity. The public pressure started affecting the supermarket's business. Some customers switched to competitors, and suppliers began questioning whether they wanted to remain associated with the brand. Catherine, the wife of one supplier, played a key role in mobilizing other business owners. "My husband decided to temporarily suspend deliveries," she told Dorothy. "It's not a boycott, it's a stance. He doesn't want our brand associated with discriminatory practices." Other suppliers followed suit. Within days, the supermarket faced supply shortages in multiple departments. The situation William Parker had tried to ignore was becoming a real financial problem. Edward Thompson, the regional director, pressured Richard again for answers. This time he wasn't interested in excuses. He wanted solutions to contain the crisis. "You need to fix this urgently," Edward said. "Suppliers are cancelling contracts, and customers are going to competitors." "It's just a storm in a teacup," Richard replied, downplaying the situation. "It'll blow over." "It won't blow over until you take responsibility for what you've done. We have dozens of reports of inappropriate behavior. This is no coincidence." Richard finally realized his position was threatened. He tried a new strategy. He offered Dorothy money in exchange for a public retraction. He contacted her through an intermediary, proposing generous financial compensation if she said it was all a misunderstanding. "He thinks he can buy my dignity," Dorothy told Robert when she learned of the offer. "This only confirms he knows he acted wrongly." The bribery attempt was the final element Jennifer needed to strengthen the legal case. It showed consciousness of guilt and an attempt to obstruct justice. Robert carefully documented everything, including the date, time, and identity of the intermediary. "Now we have him right where we want him," Jennifer said. "But Mom, do you still want to try resolving this outside the courts?" Dorothy reflected on the question. Part of her wanted to see Richard face the legal consequences of his actions, but the teacher in her still believed in the power of education and change through dialogue. "I'll give Mr. Parker one last chance to do the right thing. If he refuses to meet with us, we proceed to court." The second meeting attempt was scheduled for a Friday. This time, Dorothy brought not only Jennifer, but also 3 other victims who agreed to share their stories in person. William Parker finally received them. He was a man in his 70s, with graying hair and a weary expression. He seemed genuinely troubled by the situation, but also defensive of his son-in-law. "Ladies, I'm truly sorry if there was any misunderstanding," he began. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Dorothy interrupted politely. "It was systematic abuse of power, and we have proof." Over the next hour, Dorothy and the other women recounted their experiences. William listened in silence, clearly disturbed by the details. The situation was far worse than he had imagined. "Were you aware this has been going on for years?" Jennifer asked. Some complaints reached me, but I was always told they were isolated incidents, misunderstandings." "Over 20 documented cases are not misunderstandings," Dorothy said firmly. "They're a pattern of behavior your company allowed and covered up." William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where customers came and went from his store. He thought of all the years he had worked to build a solid reputation, only to discover it was being tarnished by his own son-in-law. "What do you want me to do?" he finally asked. "We want real change," Dorothy replied. "Not just punishment for Richard, but guarantees this won't happen to anyone else." The conversation continued for another hour. William promised an internal investigation and appropriate measures, but Dorothy sensed he was still trying to protect Richard. The meeting ended without concrete resolutions. "He won't do anything meaningful," Jennifer concluded as they left the office. "He's more concerned with protecting his family than correcting the wrongs." Dorothy felt a mix of sadness and determination. She had given opportunities for an amicable resolution, but it was now clear that other means would be necessary to achieve justice. The following week, Jennifer filed a class action lawsuit against the supermarket. The case included all the victims who agreed to join, seeking not only compensation for emotional damages, but also structural changes within the company. The legal action had an immediate impact. Local newspapers began covering the story, and it gained regional attention. Amanda intensified her social media coverage, always keeping the focus on the need for broader societal change. Richard tried one last gambit. He claimed he was being targeted for personal reasons, and that the accusations were part of a conspiracy to ruin his career. Few people believed his version, especially after more supermarket employees began speaking up. Mrs. Jenkins was the first to break the silence among the staff. Encouraged by Dorothy's courage, she reported other incidents she had witnessed, but never reported out of fear of retaliation. "He did this often," she told a local newspaper in an interview. "He picked people he thought wouldn't fight back and treated them like criminals. We employees knew, but we were too afraid to speak." Other employees followed Mrs. Jenkins' lead. Stories emerged about how Richard also mistreated the team, creating a toxic work environment. The situation was becoming unsustainable for the company. Edward Thompson pressured William Parker to make a final decision. Sales numbers were plummeting, employees were resigning, and the company's reputation was taking a severe hit. "We have to remove Richard immediately," Edward argued. "Every day he stays in his position makes things worse." "He's married to my daughter," William replied, revealing the real reason for his reluctance. "And would your daughter rather be married to an unemployed man or someone who destroyed the family business?" The pressure finally broke William's resistance. In a tense family meeting, he announced his decision to remove Richard from his managerial role. Amanda, Richard's wife and William's daughter, was furious. "You're ruining my marriage over some exaggerated complaints," she shouted. "They're not exaggerated, dear," William replied wearily. "I've seen the evidence. Your husband abused the power I gave him." Richard was formally removed the following Monday. The news spread quickly among employees and customers. Many quietly celebrated, relieved they wouldn't have to work with or be served by someone so problematic. But Dorothy knew Richard's removal was just the first step. She wanted to ensure structural changes were implemented to protect future customers and employees. "This isn't about revenge," she explained to a reporter. "It's about creating an environment where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. With Richard gone, attention turned to the changes Dorothy had proposed. She suggested creating a mandatory training program on respectful and non-discriminatory service for all employees. "I can coordinate this program," Dorothy offered during a meeting with the new administration. 40 years as an educator have given me experience in behavior change." William, now more open to suggestions, accepted the proposal. He realized Dorothy wasn't interested in destroying his company, but in making it better. The retired teacher had transformed her pain into purpose. The first module of the training program took place a month later. Dorothy prepared a comprehensive course on diversity, respect, and customer rights. Every employee, from janitors to management, participated. "Every customer who walks in here deserves to be treated with dignity," Dorothy said at the opening of the first session, "no matter their color, age, appearance, or social status. Everyone deserves respect." The employees, initially skeptical, gradually engaged with the activities. Dorothy used her teaching experience to make the content interesting and relevant. She shared real-life stories, including her own experience, to illustrate the importance of proper treatment. Mrs. Jenkins was one of the most engaged participants in the training sessions. She had found her voice and now felt empowered to speak up about issues that had always bothered her. "Professor Dorothy is teaching us things we should have known a long time ago," she remarked to other employees, "like how to recognize our biases and how to address them." The changes in the supermarket were gradually noticed by customers. The atmosphere became more welcoming, with staff smiling more and being more attentive. Some people who had stopped shopping there began to return. Megan documented the entire transformation on her social media, showing how positive change can be created through persistence and constructive dialogue. Her approach inspired others to stand up against similar situations in their communities. Robert watched proudly as his wife underwent this transformation. The woman who had left the supermarket humiliated was now being recognized as an agent of social change. She had found a new mission for her retirement years. "You've always been a natural educator," he told Dorothy. "Now you're teaching even more important lessons." The training program expanded to other locations in the supermarket chain. William acknowledged that the problems weren't limited to the store where Dorothy had been humiliated. A cultural shift was needed across the entire company. Jennifer, in turn, used the case as a precedent to help other victims of discrimination in retail establishments. She developed a legal protocol that could be applied in similar situations, offering her services free of charge to those who couldn't afford a lawyer. "My mother taught me that education transforms lives," Jennifer said during a consumer rights lecture. "Now I'm using my profession to continue that mission of change." 3 months after the initial incident, Dorothy received an unexpected invitation. The local Chamber of Commerce wanted to honor her for her contribution to better business practices in the region. Other business owners had been inspired by her story to review their own customer service policies. "I never imagined such a painful situation could lead to so much positive change," Dorothy reflected during the award ceremony. The audience, made up of business owners, public servants, and community members, gave her a standing ovation after her speech on dignity and respect in customer service. Among those present was Richard. He had arrived quietly and sat at the back of the auditorium. After the event, he hesitantly approached Dorothy. "Professor, may I speak with you?" Dorothy studied him for a moment, remembering the humiliation she had endured months earlier. But she also recalled her years as an educator, when she believed in everyone's capacity for change. "Go ahead." I want to apologize for what I did, not just to you but to everyone else. I was wrong, and it took me time to realize just how wrong I was." Richard's voice trembled, clearly emotional. He had spent months reflecting on his behavior, especially after losing his job and facing marital problems. "I grew up in a family where that kind of attitude was normal," he continued. "My father treated employees and people he considered beneath him the same way. I thought I was just being strict at work." Dorothy listened without interrupting, recognizing sincerity in his words. As a teacher, she had learned to distinguish between empty apologies and genuine remorse. "I started therapy," Richard went on. "I'm learning about my biases and how they affected others. I know this doesn't undo what I did, but I want you to know I've changed." "I accept your apology," Dorothy replied after a pause. "But understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. What you did to others and to me was serious. I know. And I know I have a lot of work ahead to become a better person." Dorothy saw tears in Richard's eyes and recognized the possibility of redemption she had always believed existed in every human being. It was the hardest moment, but also the most important in the whole process. "If you've truly changed, use this experience to help others change too," she said. "That's the only way to truly repair the damage you caused." Richard nodded and walked away, clearly moved by Dorothy's generosity. She had shown the greatness that always defined her, offering a chance at redemption even to someone who had hurt her so deeply. Robert, who had watched the conversation from a distance, approached his wife. "I'm proud of you," he said, hugging her. "I always knew I married a special woman, but you keep surprising me." In the following months, the changes implemented in the supermarket took hold. The company developed a strict code of conduct with clear consequences for discriminatory behavior. Employees reported significant improvements in the work environment. Customers who had left the store gradually returned, many commenting on the difference in service and the overall atmosphere. The supermarket became a model of best practices in the region. Dorothy continued coordinating training programs, expanding them to include not just employees, but also suppliers and business partners. Her educational approach proved more effective than punishments in creating lasting change. "Education has always been my passion," she explained in an interview for a local TV program. "Now I'm educating for real life, for fairer and more respectful human relationships." Amanda kept documenting the transformation and used her platform to inspire similar changes in other cities. Her video series on the case became study material in business and human rights courses. Jennifer opened an office specializing in discrimination and consumer rights cases. She offered free consultations for low-income individuals and had become a reference in the field. Her mother's case had steered her career toward a social mission. "I learned from my mother that justice isn't just about punishing those who make mistakes, but about creating opportunities so the mistakes aren't repeated," Jennifer said in a lecture to law students. A year after the initial incident, the supermarket held a special event to mark the implemented changes. A plaque with values of respect and equality was installed at the main entrance for all to see. Dorothy was invited to unveil it, accompanied by others who had contributed to the changes, among them Mrs. Jenkins, now promoted to customer service supervisor, and Amanda, recognized as an ambassador for positive workplace culture. "A year ago, I left this place humiliated and hurt," Dorothy said during the ceremony. "Today I return to celebrate how pain can be turned into growth, how conflict can lead to understanding, and how one determined person can make a difference." The audience, made up of employees, customers, and community members, applauded emotionally. Many had tears in their eyes, touched by the transformation they had witnessed. William Parker, now over 70, approached Dorothy after the ceremony. "Professor, I want to thank you for not giving up on us. You could have sued us and ruined our reputation, but you chose to educate us. That made all the difference." "I chose to believe that people can change when given the right tools," Dorothy replied. "You and your company proved me right." Among the attendees was Richard, who had sent flowers with a card thanking her for opening his eyes. He was now working in a different field, had taken courses on diversity and human relations, and was slowly rebuilding his life based on new values. "He didn't have to be here today," Robert remarked, noticing Richard's presence. "But he chose to come. That shows the change was real." Dorothy smiled. remembering all the difficult students she had taught over the years. She had always believed that behind every problematic behavior was a person capable of growth and improvement. The supermarket chain had officially adopted the policies Dorothy created across all its locations. The training program she developed became a model for other companies in the industry. Several retail chains sought her services to implement similar changes. "I never imagined I'd become a diversity consultant at 63, Dorothy joked during a family lunch. "Life really has surprises in store for us." Jennifer smiled, proud of her mother's transformation. The woman who had once felt small and humiliated had become a reference in human rights and social change. Her story inspired people across the country. Robert documented every achievement, every speech, every change implemented. He was compiling material to write a book about Dorothy's journey, showing how determination and education can overcome injustice. "Your story needs to be shared with more people," he told Dorothy. "It could inspire other victims of discrimination not to give up fighting for justice." On the second anniversary of the incident, Dorothy was invited to a national convention of retail business owners. Her speech on dignity in customer service filled the main auditorium, with people from all over the country eager to learn about her methodologies. "Every customer is a human being with a story, feelings, and dignity," she told an audience of over 1,000. "When we forget that, we don't just hurt individuals, we harm society as a whole." The presentation was recorded and went viral on social media, reaching millions of views. Companies from various sectors began approaching Dorothy to implement similar programs. Amanda, now with over 100,000 followers, founded an organization dedicated to combating discrimination in businesses. She used her influence to amplify the voices of other victims and connect them with legal and support resources. "Mrs. Johnson's story taught me that one person can be the catalyst for enormous change," Amanda said in an interview. She turned her personal pain into a social movement. Mrs. Jenkins, promoted again at the company, now coordinated a mentorship program for new employees. She shared her experience about the importance of speaking up when witnessing injustice. "I learned that silence protects no one," she told new hires. "When we see something wrong and stay quiet, we become part of the problem." The supermarket became a destination for study visits from other companies interested in learning about its inclusive practices. The transformation had become a case study in universities and business schools. Dorothy, meanwhile, established a routine of speaking engagements and consulting, always keeping her focus on education as a tool for social change. She had found a new career that combined her experience as a teacher with her personal journey. "Teaching about respect and dignity has become my life's mission," she reflected in an interview. "Every person who changes their attitude multiplies that transformation for others." On a special Sunday, Dorothy decided to do her shopping at the same supermarket where it had all begun. She was accompanied by Robert, Jennifer, and her grandchildren in a family outing that had become a tradition. As she entered the store, she was greeted with genuine smiles and warm welcomes. Employees who had participated in her training sessions made a point to say hello. Customers recognized her and thanked her for her contributions in making the place more welcoming. "Grandma, why does everyone want to talk to you?" asked her youngest grandson, 8 years old. "Because Grandma helped make this place nicer for everyone," Dorothy replied, hugging the boy. "Are you like a superhero?" Dorothy laughed, thinking about how she had gotten here. From a retired teacher publicly humiliated to a nationally recognized agent of social change. The journey had been painful, but incredibly rewarding. "I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who decided pain could turn into something good." As she walked through the aisles doing her shopping, Dorothy observed the environment around her. Diverse employees working in harmony, customers of all ages and backgrounds treated with respect, a visible code of conduct reminding everyone about values of equality. At the checkout, she was helped by a young employee who had attended her first training sessions. "Professor Dorothy, it's so good to see you. How are you?" "Very well, dear. And you? How are things here?" "Wonderful. The work environment has completely changed. Now everyone respects each other, employees and customers. You started a quiet revolution here." Dorothy smiled, touched by the recognition. She paid for her groceries and headed toward the exit, carrying not just shopping bags, but the satisfaction of turning her painful experience into positive change for an entire community. At the door, she paused for a moment to read the plaque she had helped unveil. Here, every person is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of background, appearance, or social standing. The words perfectly captured the transformation she had helped create. "Ready?" Robert asked, offering his arm to walk her to the car. "Ready," Dorothy replied, but her voice carried a tone of deep contentment. On the way home, she reflected on the entire journey. She had started as a victim of discrimination and become a social educator. She had found purpose in her retirement years and inspired changes that spread far beyond her personal experience. "You know what makes me proudest?" she said to her family. "It's not the recognition I've received, but knowing other people won't go through what I did. That my pain helped protect others." Jennifer held her mother's hand, moved. The woman she had always admired as a teacher now inspired her as a social activist. Dorothy's transformation had impacted the whole family, showing the power of peaceful resistance and education. "Mom, you always taught me that education changes the world. Now I've seen it happen in real life. And the best part is, this is just the beginning," Dorothy replied, looking to the future with hope. "Every person we change will influence others, creating waves of transformation we can't even imagine." When they got home, they found several messages from people wanting to hire her consulting services. Companies from other states, social organizations, even government agencies interested in implementing diversity and inclusion programs. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," Robert said, checking the messages. "Your story is inspiring change across the country." Dorothy smiled, thinking of all the opportunities to continue her educational mission. At 63, she had found a purpose that uniquely combined her professional experience with her personal journey. The end of the story. Dear listener, now tell us what you thought of this inspiring story of overcoming and transformation. Do you believe Dorothy made the right decisions by turning her pain into social change? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Your participation means so much to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other moving stories of people who turned challenges into victories.